I'm John Barclay and welcome to the Fatality Free Future podcast.
My name is Holly Ferguson. This is the podcast where we explore the challenges and possibilities of creating a fatality-free future. Recruiting in the safety space is typically quite costly and time-intensive, particularly with medicals. Our guest today has over 30 years of experience in physical performance, rehabilitation, physical ergonomics, and his mission now is to empower businesses to reshape their recruitment processes with his screening tool, Fit4Work, which is redefining what is possible. Welcome, Mark Armstrong.
Wow, Holly, how do I follow that? Yes, welcome. Thanks very much. Good to be here, and thanks for the invitation to talk to you guys this morning.
So I'm sort of keen to hear about your journey over that physical human performance space, which was previously to that, I think it was Body Active. Yeah. So, keen to sort of hear that journey and how that led into you getting to where you are now.
Yeah, very long story, I guess. But, I mean, it started back at university when I wanted to be a phys ed teacher, believe it or not. And then I got to that point and went, no, I don't want to be a phys ed teacher. There's more to life. So then I started to engage in biomechanics and physiology, and that's probably where my passion for what I'm doing now started many, many years ago. And I got to meet Professor Tim Ackland, who was my biomechanics lecturer, who, interestingly enough, is now one of my consultants and a shareholder of my company. So it just goes to see how, comes along later on. So essentially what I did was I took a pathway and I wanted to understand the body. So my interest in the body and the way it worked, both internally, externally, just grew and grew and grew. And I did a master's degree, and that sort of fueled my passion for prevention, because all I was seeing when I was doing workers' comp rehab was just rehab. It's like people get injured, go and do rehab, get back to work. And I thought there's got to be a better way. So I remember when I got out of uni and got sort of into the market, I was either too overqualified and didn't have enough experience. So I started my own business, which is where Body Active Consultancy basically came from. So my mission then was, okay, everybody's doing rehab. Certainly can't we do some prevention focus, because it saves time, saves money. It's just a much more effective model. So I explored with a couple of the insurers and we got prevention away in the early 90s. So Body Active Consultancy from that point on became a company that looked at prevention. So we had three different sectors in our company. We had our injury management sector, we had our medical sector where we did the medicals traditionally the way they're done today, and we had a consulting section. So I had nearly 30 staff at that stage all doing that stuff, and it just got to a point as we went through the 90s, very much into the early 2000s, that prevention became acceptable. And it was just a process, everybody's going, yeah, but how do you prevent this? Well, that's when I got into physical ergonomics, and that's when I focused on what we call manual handling back in those days, which is today called manual tasks. So my second love, if you like, is how the human interfaces with the work that they do, whether that's on a footy field, whether that's on a mine site, whatever's happening. What's that interaction look like musculoskeletally? Can we get better at matching humans and their physical capabilities with the physical demands of the job, which is what underpins the philosophy for the app.
And when you and I first started talking about what you're doing now, is that when you got into the real important need to actually assess individual roles?
Yeah, it was actually an interesting transition, John. I had we were doing really well in the space, and I had no real need to change. I could have sat in that space, but me being who I am and those people who know me, as soon as I get a bit of a bug about something, I really sort of take a deep dive into it. So what happened was back in 2015-16, which is when the journey began, I had one of my big clients come to me and basically sit me down in my office and say, you're too expensive, it costs too much, takes too long, we can't get enough people through, what are you going to do about it? So instead of them solving the problem, they came and sat with me and said, you've got a problem now, you need to solve it. And of course, you can imagine what that did to me. I started thinking, oh, okay, so this is going to turn my business upside down. I need to get on the front foot here. So I thought about it, and then it went back to, took me a few weeks to grapple with it and a few more discussions with this company. But then I went back to one of the papers I wrote as part of my master's degree, where I looked at a predictive-based algorithm model that predicted RSI back in the day. And RSI back in Australia in the day was huge. We really was one country that was dealing with something like 72 different variations of what RSI meant to industry and companies. So, of course, I took that on and I wrote a paper on it. And as it turned out, I built this model with the help of a number of people in the department that had an 89% predictability accuracy, that I could actually ask people a certain number of questions and I could then predict, male or female, whether they would get RSI based on the job that they were doing, which was repetition based. And I used that same, I guess, philosophy or thinking power, and I thought, you know what, if we can do it for RSI, surely we can do it for pre-employment assessments. And that's how the journey began back in the day.
I would love a little bit of context about why we actually do medicals in the first place. Why are they deemed so important?
Do you know, Holly, I've been trying to figure that out for a long, long time. So what I did was, again, I took a little bit of dive into research, and probably my university background helps me because I know where to look. You know, a lot of average people weren't. So I looked at the National Health Scheme in Europe, mainly in London, okay, in England. Back in the mid-1990s, they had the same issue where we've got now, where people in the community could not get in to see their GP because they were too busy doing medicals. So what they did, the National Health Service did a questionnaire. They got all these medical centres involved, and they did a trial. And they found out after the trial, and this is a paper, I can't think of the actual paper, but I've got a copy of the paper. When I read this, I went, you know what, we're so far behind. And the result of that study was that they built a questionnaire that was effective as anything else, 92% effectiveness in the pre-employment medicals. So today, they don't do pre-employment medicals. There's certain industries that do. So if you go offshore in the oil and gas industry, there's certain regulations that people have to do because it's an offshore, very risky environment. But for the general punter, they don't do it. They just give them a questionnaire. And what that did, and one of my philosophical reasons for doing that, is that released all of these hours into the medical system, which allowed the GPs to get on with delivering medicine to the community. And we've got that problem right now. And you talk to GPs, generally speaking, they'll just say, we're doing medicals, we're not delivering services. And it's in the paper. What is it, 4 to 6 weeks now to get an appointment to see your GP? We're going through exactly the same thing right now in Australia.
And it's similar for the organisations trying to do their medicals, right? I mean, as a consultant who goes to sites and works with many different companies, I'm constantly going through medicals. Yeah. And, you know, it can take a couple of weeks to get booked in to just do a medical. That becomes a really big challenge in itself. And you're right, whenever you go do the medicals, there's always a building full of GPs in there signing off, reviewing the assessment to give the findings to the organisations. But on that, when and why did organisations get into this position of having to do medicals for everybody that starts work? I mean, why did that happen?
This is one of my real passions, and I've been exploring this with one of my OC physicians who's 45 years experience, very well respected in the industry. And if I can refer to a couple of notes, he sent me an email last night, so I'm going to refer to these. I think it's really important. Yeah, so I'm going to just read this out because this is really fascinating stuff. He writes, in the 1960s and 70s, large companies conducted health assessments before being employed on all workers to ascertain the health of each worker. All workers were given a TPD cover as part of their remuneration in case of early medical retirement for an illness and injury conditions. The insurance industry demanded, they're very important, demanded a pre-employment medical assessment which allowed their risk assessment and premium setting. So this goes back to the insurers back in 1960, 1970. Pre-employment medical examination was purely for access to TPD cover for all employees should they need to access premature medical retirement. The insurance underwriters required a medical assessment before commencing work. This particular person was part of this process in Queensland, one of the first at Mount Isa where it first started in Australia. Workers' compensation processes introduced by every state and territory being mandatory does not require a pre-employment medical examination unless demanded by the underwriting agency at their discretion. Government agencies set premiums on the industry sector job risks, so there is no need for pre-employment medical assessment. Many superannuation funds require a medical declaration when employees seek life insurance cover. The short answer, this has been driven by the insurers. It's not being driven by companies. And what's happening now is, I think my own opinion is when I talk to companies, the feeling I get is that they seem to have this misconception about there's a link between us doing pre-employment medicals and functional assessments and the number of workers' compensation cases. I can categorically state I have looked at every research paper that I can lay my hands on globally, and there is no such relationship at all. So I don't know who's tricking who at the moment, But there's a lot of tricking going on out there presently.
It's a big industry to keep tricking.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And I've got some stories, but that's for another time.
Mark, you mentioned before that the catalyst for you starting to think about doing medicals differently was that client coming to you, sitting in your office. Tell us about how you went from that moment to where you are today.
Okay, so once I spoke to that client, I had another client who came to me who was really keen to work with me on this, and bit out of left field because it was a crane company. So, not directly, associated with the resource sector, because most of my life I've spent consulting in the resource sector. But he came to me and said, look, I'm really keen to work with you on this. And so him and I got together. We designed what I consider to be a prototype. So when you design a prototype, you've got to test it. You've got to test the theory. So we set up a hypothesis. We used his company and his employees to test it over a period of, I think it was about 18 months. And sure enough, at the end of that period, we thought, okay, we've got something here. It was rough. It's like polishing a stone. It was as rough as anything. But I thought, this has got some potential. If I had known it was going to take me 10 years to get to that potential, I probably would have rethought it. But, with me, if I see that there's a chance to change and make the change better, then I tend to do that. I tend to go for it. And I disregard the stress and all of the challenges, and there's been plenty of both of those, but you can make a change, and the change can have an enormous impact. And I'm seeing that now with clients. I'm seeing I had a re-interviewed someone who worked for a company 4 years ago who saw the app 4 years ago. They saw the app 2 weeks ago and they went, oh my God, Mark, this has come so far. So when you get comments like that from just normal people working their day-to-day job in an industry, you know that you've had an impact, you've made a change, and that's what keeps me going.
That's what's been exciting me, right? Because you and I met four odd years ago as well, 4 or 5 years ago, right? And again, trialled it back then because you were still in that development stage, and seeing what it is now versus what it was then, it's just such a great tool and such a great process that's, to me, yes, it's changed, but what I'm excited about, I actually think it's going to be a massive disruptor.
What are some of the things you were setting out to achieve when you created the app?
Okay, so it was really interesting, and this has changed over the years. So the first thing that we set our sights on from the feedback we got was people are really upset about the cost. Because back in the day when my company was doing pre-employments, we were charging $600, $700, $800, and then that's changed now because the average cost round now, depending on what you want, starts at about $250 and then goes up to $1,250 if you're in the coal sector, for example. So the cost was the number one thing back in the day, but as we've moved forward and developed the app and got more feedback and engagement and so on, that's changed, and there's a couple of really important ones. So apart from cost, there's the time, and John mentioned this before. I myself was going to site a month or so ago, and I had to go and sit in a surgery to do a DNA. I was there for 45 minutes to do a drug and alcohol test. That's just ridiculous. 45 minutes to do a test, it took me 3 minutes. I talked to a client yesterday. They can't get an appointment with their own service provider for 10 days. So they've got to wait 10 days before they can even get the assessment done, then get the report, try and understand the report, because most people don't, and then try and make a decision on whether they employ the person. So they're losing 2.5 weeks. That's a lot of time. And the companies just don't have that time. So time is a real factor. The other one that's come into focus right now is losing candidates. That's a big deal now. People are just losing candidates because it's taking too long. People are going, you know what, you're taking too long, I'm off down the road for an extra $5 an hour. So it's actually not even the hourly rate now. It's about you're taking too long. So we came across all this stuff, things like people not understanding how to interpret the information on the report. So basically, after 5 or 6 years, I came up with this list, and I just basically picked off the list. Started with cost, got the cost down. Started with the time. Our system, if I send you a text right now, Holly, you can do it if you're tech savvy, you can do it in 10 minutes anywhere in the world. That was another thing. We solved the geographical restrictiveness. So my app, if you're in Estonia, for example, or in Canada, I can send you the app and you can do it. Tell me about a medical provider that can do that in Australia. There isn't any. So that was another one. People loved it. So when you talk to clients who've got people distributed geographically around Australia, Pilbara, Kimberley for WA, for example, I can send them an app no matter where they are. As long as they've got connectivity, they can do my app. So that was a big one as well. That came about with a couple of trials we did with those people who have a lot of regional disbursement of their workforce. So as we've gone through, we've solved the problems, and that's what it's all about. You know, you want to solve a problem, and if you can solve it well, then people will listen to you.
And within that process now, I mean, obviously doing the assessment now through the app, and it's more cost effective, it's more time supportive, but also in that recruitment stage, it really speeds up that screening process. Instead of it taking weeks, it's now the same day,
essentially.
Basically. On that though, I mean, we're screening an individual for a role. How have you built in the suitability of the assessment to a role? So for example, I'm generally a consultant going to say, I'm not doing any hard labour, I'm generally working in a training room, or I'm following people around site, versus say a boilermaker who's doing hard physical work. How have you incorporated that in the process?
That was probably one of the biggest, and continues to be an ongoing challenge. But in saying that, it's also become my passion, because that's my role within the company. And the way we did that is that I looked at what was happening, and all I saw was that no matter what position, and I'll use some old language here, blue and white collar workers, most people can relate to that. White collar tends to be admin type based person, sits in an office, etc., etc. So we looked at that, and I came up with a way of defining per job profile. Now, that's not a job position description. I created these things called job profiles, and job profiles looks at things like, yes, what do they do? What is the physicality of what they do? What health requirements are necessary? What environmental impact will it be? So it's different to working in 45-degree heat in Pilbara compared to working in 30-degree heat outside down in Perth. There was a whole lot of variables I had to consider. So what I did was I took all of my job profiles, which now in the back end, we call it the back end, in our database back end, we have over 1,250 customised individual job roles. And what I noted in the industry was that if you went to a medical, and it still happens today, they'll just assess you the same way. Whether you're a white-collar worker or a blue-collar worker, there's no variation. And the variation comes with, they might not do as hard a physical for you if you're white-collar. Well, to me, that doesn't cut it. So what I set about was I went, you know what, we're going to do it on a job profile by job profile basis. So if you come to me as a manager, you'll be assessed as a manager based on a job profile. So what we did was I converted all my job profiles using AI. We've now worked out a way that we can take a job position description and create a job profile. That was the first thing. The second thing was we had to work out how to evaluate that particular role and give it a physicality level rating of 1 to 5, 1 starting from sedentary, 5 being very heavy. And they play a really important role. So when someone comes in and a recruiter puts in a job role, they've got their own portal, they select a job role. As soon as that job role goes in, it sits at the back end. So all of the information from the app is assessed directly against that job profile. So it's a very accurate way of determining if someone is suitable for the job. And I come back to the statement I made before. One of the very important founding ideas about this is measuring up someone's physical capabilities with the physical demands of the job. Let's face it, up to 80% of injuries that companies get are musculoskeletal. So it makes sense to really focus on that. Sure, there's going to be health in other things like high blood pressure and allergies and all that sort of stuff. That's okay. But most people who've got those will either know about it and be on medication for it. And that's why we focused on that.
What's been some of the feedback you've had so far from both employers and users of the app?
Feedback's been really good. In fact, I take my hat off. I started with 4 or 5 companies who are still with me now, and they've been unbelievable. Without them, this app wouldn't be possible because we've worked collaboratively. We've worked on changing the system, testing the system, moving things around. That's the only way I've been able to build the app. Probably one of the most important things was the apps consist basically of 3 parts. The questions that we call the magical 20, and we can change and add to them. So, for example, we're looking at adding a question later this year on medical marijuana because it's such a big thing in industry, but we don't have any real information out there Australia-wide. There's no legislation, so we're waiting for that to come about, but I'm sure that the next question in our system will be about medical marijuana. So the questions, it took us 3 years. We started with over 100 questions to get to a magical 20. Why did it take so long? Because we trialled them. We went to companies and said, we've got all these questions. Do you mind if we trial them? Because we need to work out which ones are really good. And then I gave it to the OC physicians and said, hey, do these questions look like something you would ask if you were sitting across from a patient? And sure enough, that's how we whittled it down. So that's the question part one. Part two was the photos. We had to work out a way of pulling off biometric data from photos. So we had to work out a system, and that's where this, what we call photo shadow comes in, because we needed all the photos, male and female, to be the same. So we could build our models, AI models, but we could also get the data. So that took us a while to do that. And I must say, working with Apple and working with Android, hugely different. I thought it would be easy, but really different. Seriously. And that's what a lot of people don't realise, that when you build an app, you've got to build an app for both. Yeah. You can't build an app for one, because I think Apple controls 60-70% of the market and Android the rest. So we were literally building two platforms for the app.
Wow.
Right? So, and then you get the last one, and the last part took us probably the longest, and that was the videos, because we started by just asking, can you do this? And I went, no, that's not acceptable. So to build the models took me 18 months. And the reason it took me 18 months to create these models was I had to video a whole range of females, a whole range of males, different ages, different capabilities, and that's what sits in now, our models. No one else has these models that I'm aware of. So that took me 18 months just to video and get our models started. So now as people do this and the models are fed, the models are getting more accurate. And that's where AI for me is really important, for our system.
And within that, I mean, the 3-stage process is, again, I've been through it a couple of times now with you, and it's really robust and really effective, and it gives a very simple output at the end. I would assume probably one of the main questions our listeners are having is, well, it's online, it's survey, it's this, it's that. Can people trick the system, and how have you tried to sort of manage that process?
Really good question, John. Yeah, look, we've had a couple. We've had 3 to date that have tried to wiggle their way around the process, and I can say now that 3 times they've all resigned. And this is a result of a couple of things working within the system. Firstly, we have a very robust disclaimer that people have to read before the app will open. So they're told to read it. They're told if they don't understand it to ask questions, okay? And this is where we've caught every single person. So at the moment, we've got a ticker box. Well, that's going to be converted in a couple of weeks to a signer box where you actually put your authorisation on. I've got some very, very good lawyers who are helping me with all this sort of stuff from a legal perspective, because for me, I look at if I end up in court, what's this look like? And that's how I have to think as the founder of the app. So a couple of guys, and 2 guys and 1 girl tried it, and they both got caught out because essentially they were asked a question by the recruiter, did you read the disclaimer? And the answer was yes. So then they've rung me and said, can I have a copy of the disclaimer, because I can't get the app. I've sent the disclaimer through. They've actually asked the person to reread the disclaimer, and the person's gone, okay, I resign. It's as simple as that, because that disclaimer is a legally binding agreement. So if you tell a lie, you put the wrong thing in, etc., that's run. So that's what I call the first level of protection. The second level of protection is the way the app's set up. So we get them to take photos, and then straight after that, we get them to put some input in around things like, what's your waist measurement look like? What's your hip measurement look like? What's your neck measurement look like? And what that does is the apps and the end algorithms working go back and check the photo. And then as soon as there's a disparity between what they put in and the photos, it flags. So there's a whole lot of those sort of systems that are built in the app where if anybody understands what an algorithm is it's like a big spider web that's interconnected. And that's what the algorithm works on. And then the AI comes in and provides the visual stuff. This is what we consider to be standard. And that's where the videos of them doing the exercise is really important.
There's one thing I know when we spoke about this 4 or 5 years ago, and we've had multiple conversations on it. While the app is a good disruptor or an alternative to the typical medical process, you've done a lot of this now, and you started to get some data around how people go through the process, and you've got sort of 3 different outcomes, and correct me if I get these wrong. Yep. There's generally a pass, the person's passed. There's generally hey, just need to get a letter from your doctor to check that some things have been managed that have been identified, and send them off for a medical. If we're doing this and we still get to send them off to a medical, how often does that sort of happen?
Okay, yeah, good question, John. So at the moment, our stats telling us, now we've done over 4,500 transactions so far. When we started the throughput, so out of every 100 people that were going through the system, 86 people were getting approved, and there was 14 being required to do further assessments. That figure has now climbed to 91% because the app's got more sophisticated. So it's becoming more specific about what it wants to refer to. And you're right in terms of your outputs, and I'll just extend on that. So essentially it's recommended for the position. So at the moment, 91 out of 100 people are being recommended. And I'll come back to that. It's really important.
So that's not further work. That's
no further, you just recommended, get on the plane or whatever and off you go. Then there's the traditional ones which we see today. You need a medical, you need a functional, or you need both. They're probably the lower end, all right? The letter was introduced by me because I got to a point 2 or 3 years ago when I kept getting these medicals and functionals going, you know what? That's not telling us anything else about this particular position. Take mental health. If you send someone who declares, I've got anxiety and depression, no point sending them for a medical. You're not going to get any more information that's going to be helpful from an employer's perspective.
You want to know it's being managed.
Correct. And that's exactly what I thought. And I thought the only person that can give us that is either the GP who's treating them or the health professional. So I intervened and said, look, we need a letter. And the letter needs to start off with something like, the candidate's declared that. Now, whether that's a heart condition, whether that's got something to do with an allergy, whether that's got something to do with a motor vehicle accident, a workers' comp, there's all this stuff, right? So I just made the decision that we need a letter. And the letter needs to ask the treating professional, is the condition they've got stable? Are they taking medication? If they are, is that under management? And secondly, and thirdly, and most importantly, does that have an impact on the particular job that they are being employed for? So we want to know if you're going to be a fitter and you're going to be working in a Pilbara 45-degree heat and you suffer from anxiety and you're on a light medication, is that going to have an impact on your job as a fitter? And that's what the letter does. So the letter comes up. Now, the letter started out at about 5-6%. It's now 30% of the recommendations. So of the recommended, 30% of that number is made up with a letter, and I think that's going to grow. And the reason I say that is we're seeing huge amounts of medication coming through. And we're seeing people with a lot more depression, anxiety, those sort of low-end mental health issues coming through. So you're getting a combination in the environment. And the letter, in my opinion, is the only way that we can be specific in getting a result for an employer who then says, yep, I understand, it's on thing. Diabetes, for example.
It's increasing, right?
It's increasing, so these are the sort of things that employers need to be aware of. And a letter is very easy to do. The recruiter just gives the information to the candidate waddles off to their GP, pays roughly about $15, and the letter's done in 24 hours. Very, very good solution. And I believe we're the only company that does that. I haven't heard anybody else doing a letter.
And I know there's lots of detail to this question, so I guess to try and keep the confidence here. And I mean, you're now talking about medical assessments. And so how have you gone about trying to manage data sensitivity?
Big question that I pondered earlier this year. So I've now employed my own cybersecurity person. So the whole architecture of the system back in the day when we started, I had a mandate where I built it to ISO 27064, which is the structural integrity of your ISO. We're now right in the middle of the process of actually getting ready for accreditation under 27001, which is the world standard for keeping information and health. And I think once we get that, which we hope be there in the financial year, I'm not a huge fan because I think it comes down to every single company, and that's why I took, I guess it's a reasonably major step and engaged this guy. And I said, right, the first thing you need to go through, for example, is our website, and he found 4 backdoors in my brand new built website. So I think it's back to your own level of where do you want the security to be at, what level. And because we're in the number one industry that tends to get targeted for hackers, I took it upon myself and said, this is too important. We need to get someone on board, which now the guy's been on board for a month. He's now looking at what we call our development side of the app, and before he looks at our real app, which is production. But we brought our servers back. We had a couple of servers in the US, for example. We've now brought them all back to Australia. They're at AWS in Sydney now. So there's a whole lot of stuff that you can do outside of that, but you've just got to be mindful, and I'm very mindful of that sort of stuff.
Mark, what an achievement. As you said, this has taken you, about 10 years to get to this point. I would love to know, what do you think's next, maybe in the next 10 years?
what's in the next 10 years? I think for me right now, we've let the app go and it's showing us what it can do. It's also showing us what we need maybe to focus on. Like I think I shared with you before we got into this session that I was on a roller coaster ride in Singapore a week or so ago, and I thought, you know what, an app's got to be that reliable, and that's my goal, is to make an app so that when we do deliver a response or a solution or an outcome, bearing it's a recommendation only, it's not telling people to do it. That's the other thing. We're really much a screening tool. We're not an assessment tool. I think that's a really important point to make it clear. It's just a tool like anything else that helps recruiters. But I think my desire, if you like, is to have a very reliable app that's easy to use. And when we built this app, the UE and the UI were very important to me, and so much so that when I took on my third set of developers, we changed the whole language of the app. And now that cost me, as you can imagine, quite a bit of money, quite a bit of time. But when I sat down with these guys and said, look, we need to have a flexible app. We need to add and delete. We need to move things around. And they said the language that it was originally constructed in was no good for that. So we changed to what everybody probably knows as JavaScript. We use two different forms of JavaScript, but JavaScript is just a lot easier to work with. So that was a big decision because it took us 3.5 months, 4 months to change what we'd already done. And financially and time-wise, things are moving so fast out there. So you've just got to be aware. So that was a big decision, but I'm glad we did it now because we've got an app that's really fully flexible now.
Mark, this has been so insightful and we're very excited for you. Thank you so much for joining us on the Fatality Free Future podcast.
Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Mark. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fatality Free Future podcast. Head to our Fatality Free Future hub on barclays.com for more information and to access everything we spoke about in this episode.